A warm welcome to all the guests, dignitaries, executive deans, principals, heads of various institutes, faculty, colleagues, and friends on the occasion of Ganpat University Foreign Speakers Lecture Series. Today we have very eminent personality, Ms. Caryn Nery, Director, Transnational Education Partnerships, Victoria University, Australia, and Convener, International Education Association of Australia. Ma'am is going to talk on current and emerging models and markets for transnational education. Ms. Caryn Nery has been working in the field of international and transnational education for over 25 years as a teacher and teacher trainer, academic coordinator and manager of offshore and transnational education programs. She has very recently been appointed to the position of Director, Transnational Education Partnerships at Victoria University. Prior to taking up this role, Caryn worked at Monash College, where she led TNE, Transnational Education, as well as 9 years at RMIT, Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, managing major partnership in Singapore, China, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, with up to 10,000 students enrolled. Caryn is also the convener of the International Education Association of Australia's TNE network. The TNE network offers a 2-day conference for TNE leaders and practitioners from all around the world. Caryn has also been the recipient of an Australian Government Endeavour Executive Fellowship, which was spent in China investigating the regulatory environment for Chinese foreign education cooperation. I am feeling very privileged to welcome our guest with a shawl, bouquet, certificate of gratitude and memento as a token of appreciation. I hereby request Dr. Rajan Purohit to do the honor. Please, sir. I request sir to join, please.
Yes, come. Yes, please. Invite. Oh, please.
Thank you, everyone. We are fortunate to have with us Dr. Rajan Purohit, Executive Dean of Campus, Ganpat University. Sir, I would like to request you to come forward for ceremonial address, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would just start by thanking Caryn Nery to accept our invitation on a short notice, and I would also thank the Honorable Pro-Chancellor of the University, Dr. Mahendra Sharma, and my colleagues for creating this platform for having an interaction with the person of eminent personalities who are traveling from abroad to Ganpat University. As you know that we have a long-standing collaboration with Victoria University. First we signed the agreement in July 2010, and since then we have been progressing our relationship with Victoria University, which has become a case study also for the government departments. Apart from just offering a collaborative program, so we have also shaped up this collaboration into truly an academic engagement. We jointly convened 3 conferences carrying together, and we had the professors traveling from Victoria University who were the keynote speakers, including Professor David Lemond and Professor Colin Clarks. And that's how we have been fostering this relationship further and further. Just to bring to, just to share with every one of you, currently as a part of our collaborative award mechanism, the Ganpat University and Victoria University are offering programs in enterprise resource planning systems and business analytics, and soon we are going to expand our relationship with some new programs. Victoria University is also very good in law. We have just started programs in law, and we look forward to some extended some extension of this partnership going beyond the Faculty of Computer Applications and the management. With this, I would like to invite Ms. Caryn Nery to share her experience about TNE partnership, how she look forward to the TNE sector, and how it is going to establish a lot more connection between many countries through this kind of partnership models. Thank you very much, Caryn, and over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah? Okay. You don't? Yes? Yeah? I don't like to use a mic if possible. But if you can hear me, then I might not need to use this. I just want to say I am not an academic. I am a practitioner of transnational education. I've worked for about 20 years or more in the field of transnational and international education. So what I'm presenting today is a little bit of data on transnational education, but it's also my own reflections on what is happening today and what I think might happen in the future, but it's not from a research or a scientific point of view. Okay. So this is what I'm hoping to cover. I'll try and do it in half an hour because we are running late, and hope to be able to answer a few questions if you have any at the end. So I guess the first thing is just to be clear about what is TNE. There are two broad sort of types of definitions around TNE. One is around the awarding of a qualification or part of a qualification, and where the students are involved in a different country to where the institution that is providing the education is based. Or there's a broader definition of TNE, which is really more around the mobility of education programs and institutions or providers across international borders. I don't want to go into the details of the different types of definitions, but I guess you can think of it in terms of, for me, it's the program that is going somewhere else and being delivered to a set of students, whereas mobility, for me, my own understanding, the way I define it, is where the student goes somewhere else when the program remains in that institution. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about the drivers of TNE. Why is there transnational education, and what's the use of transnational education? What's the purpose? So from a host perspective, like in India, for example, and for a long time in China, where transnational education has been in place for many years, it's been around capacity building of the local institutions. So if you look at China as a case study, we've had transnational education programs there that have been approved by the Ministry of Education for many years. So RMIT University in Melbourne has a partnership with Shanghai University of International Business and Economics that's more than 20 years now. And so has Victoria University. It's got a partnership with Liaoning University for over 20 years as well. So in the model in China, they wanted that because they wanted capacity building for their institutions to learn from the Western education models. Then another perspective might be around limited local supply for places. So if you look at somewhere like Singapore, you know, they only have, I think originally 5 universities, very limited places, a lot of competition. Same here in India, I think, for those local places. So foreign education providers could come in and partner with providers who could not award their own degrees, but who had the infrastructure to host students. And so, again, going back to RMIT, it's got a partnership with Singapore Institute of Management that's almost 30 years old. So that was around the capacity of Singapore to be able to offer places, and now there's more places, but still limited supply, really. So a lot of UK, US, Australian universities are in Singapore delivering their programs. Another perspective from the host is also around internationalization and connecting their students and their staff and their programs to what is happening around the world. From a provider perspective, like Victoria University, which has a lot of offshore transnational education around the world, and particularly around Asia, it is also around internationalization and connecting with institutions and students, and increasingly alumni as well around the world. It's about brand and reputation and leveraging your presence in another country for expansion of your brand, but connection to industry, those sorts of things. And of course, for Australian institutions, it's been an important part of their diversification strategy as far as income generation. It's probably a different model to why a European university might want to go and set up offshore. For a German university, they set up, you know, I'm generalizing, but they might set up a transnational education program, not at all to make money, to lose money actually, but because they are after the internationalization benefits, or they want the collaboration for a research basis, etc. The British Council put out a couple of years ago in an effort to coordinate the data collection around transnational education. They put out a classification framework for transnational education. So they've sort of broadly defined it under independent, where the institution goes out on its own to deliver its programs overseas, or collaborative, where the institution will partner with another institution or a host provider. So with independent, you might have something like a franchise program where the university basically franchises its curriculum, its intellectual property to somewhere, but there's no branding of that other institution that they partner with. It's all about the branding of the home university. And then you might have international branch campuses, which, you know, there are not really many in India, but there are quite a lot of them, and I'll show you some stats around the world, you know, where many countries have welcomed branch campuses, and there's quite a host of them. And then there's, of course, the self-study distance education, which in the past was not online, but increasingly it's around online delivery, borderless delivery. And then you've got collaborative programs which are in partnership, and clearly the model is around collaborative delivery of the program, which is what we have with Victoria University, with Ganpat University. And then you've got the model of joint universities and colleges in China, for instance, which there are a lot of joint colleges in China, joint universities, and where the foreign university is allowed to run 3 or 4 or 5 programs within the Chinese university. And normally it's set up as a joint institute within one of the colleges or the faculties of that Chinese university. And then you've got distance education with a local academic partner, and that might be as well, that's also partner collaboration. And just in terms of the current model, I suppose the next few slides are around the statistics and also what is kind of going on around the world. And I'll start with Australia, which is what I know best. You might not be aware that of the almost 400,000 students who are studying an Australian award, that a third of them, almost a third of them are actually located offshore. They're not studying in Australia. And of those students, the majority are enrolled in undergraduate degrees, around 60%, and then another 26% in coursework master programs, and then the rest are in vocational education and training or PhDs, dual PhDs, etc. And of those, sorry, you can't really see the colours in that last slide, but the top 5, host countries for Australian transnational education are Singapore, China, Malaysia, Vietnam, and then India. Here, I'm just presenting some data on the US. So the US model, they have probably the most number of international branch campuses of any country. But when you look, in fact, at what they count as a branch campus, it's not a fully fledged campus like Ganpat. It might just be a centre, in the city where they host some of their own students to come and do a local program, possibly with a partner, but more often not. So if you look at New York University, they have branch campuses in many cities, including now in Sydney. But when you look at what they offer in Sydney, it's in fact not a whole degree. It might be a couple of subjects, and their own students would come from all around the world, and do 1 or 2 subjects in Sydney or in Madrid or in, and then they only have a small number of university of branch campuses which actually offer the whole program, and that there is one in Shanghai, and then there's one in Qatar, I think. I can't remember where. All right. But these are the top host countries as far as US TNE. And then the UK has a lot of students studying UK programs, but about maybe 300,000 of those are actually what a lot of people wouldn't classify as a full TNE program. It might be, I think the Oxford Brookes University runs a module which is a certification module for accounting, and every student who's enrolled in that gets counted in the stats for the UK, but in fact they're not delivering the whole program. So let's just say there's around 400 students studying UK higher education programs. The majority of that is in Malaysia, so a lot of universities, UK universities have branch campuses and programs in Malaysia, and then Singapore. You've got China as well, which is a high number, and there would be in the joint programs and joint institutes that are approved by the Ministry of Education. And Hong Kong, of course, because it was the UK was there for a long time, and then Egypt, which I wouldn't have expected that Egypt would be the largest host country in terms of UK TNE. In terms of China, as you can see, they are hosting quite a lot of foreign university branch campuses or joint schools. Australia has 7 of them, and Victoria University is one of those 7. I think they might have just approved one more, so I can't remember whether it was Australian National University, but China hosts 7 Australian institutions in joint schools. The United States has the most number, closely followed by the UK and France, etc. So quite a lot of students are doing a TNE program in China, lots of numbers, and around 25% of Chinese universities are involved in some form of TNE. Some of those are officially approved by the Ministry of Education, and some of them are articulation programs. They might be pathway programs, 2+2, 2 years in China, 2 years in Australia or in some other country. Okay. And then in Malaysia, as you can see, they've mainly been a host
country with all those students, not just Malaysian students studying overseas, but they, as you can see, they host a lot of international students in Malaysia. So they make it quite easy in Malaysia for an international student to come and do a transnational education degree. So the majority of international Malaysian students studying Malaysian programs might come from countries like Bangalore, like Bangladesh, Nepal, the Middle East, the Philippines, Indonesia. They have quite a lot of international students in Malaysia that do TNE programs. And they have 10 foreign university branch campuses. Swinburne University, Monash, Malaysia, Curtin University. They are Australian universities that are operating in Malaysia, and then for the UK there's Nottingham University, etc. And there are a number of foreign universities. You can see Australian universities are all there. There's only around less than, I think there's about 40 Australian universities. Most of them have some kind of foreign collaboration in TNE collaboration in Malaysia. And I thought this was an interesting slide. So Africa hosts the second number of UK higher education TNE students, and they deliver in 55 countries, which I thought was interesting because I thought there were only 54 countries in Africa. But I'm not sure where the 55 came from. But of those, no need to read all that, but of those, as I said before, Egypt hosts about 39% of the students, of the programs and the students in UK higher education. All right. So just wanting to talk a little bit about the challenges and risks before I go on to where might it go next. Victoria University has been in TNE for a long time, and for a lot of that period, it was around fly-in, fly-out faculty. They go to Malaysia for a period of 1 week or 2 weeks. They go to China and travel for another week or two. So that is becoming a little bit unsustainable for faculty, because they might be and when the institutions are, everyone is focused on rankings. And when you're focused on rankings, you want your staff to be doing research and not be spending all their time traveling around the world teaching in your offshore programs. So it's become, the FIFO model has become a little bit unsustainable, and that's one challenge for institutions that are involved in TNE. In terms of regulatory compliance and quality assurance, it can also be very tricky. So you're not only wanting to comply with your own regulator in country. So for Australia, it's the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency. So you have to meet all those very stringent regulation. It's very clear and very stringent regulation. You also have to meet the regulation of the countries where you operate. So, for many years, Australian institutions were working in Singapore. And then 10 years ago, the very laissez-faire environment that operated in Singapore for a long time for TNE suddenly got very stringent. They put in the Council for Private Education, who mandated a whole set of standards. They closed down a whole lot of small fly-by-night operators, and now it's much more stringent to work in Singapore, but it's also the legislation is very clear about what you have to meet in terms of foreign degree provider. So it's always challenging. In India, I think the regulation's still pretty grey. There's probably, and I've read that some of the draft education. How many of you have read the draft education policy? The draft Indian National Education Policy. I read it, about 3/4 of it, which is a fantastic, policy, I think, and very aspirational. But it acknowledges in that document that for foreign education providers, the legislation is very challenging because you don't know, you know, which regulatory agency you need to work with. For many countries around the world, like Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, the markets are very mature, there's a lot of competition, and also the student populations are declining. So your enrollment numbers are gradually decreasing during that time. So is it then, you know, do you close shop eventually? At what point do you exit after you've been there for 20, 30 years? You know, you have to start looking at your operations to see whether it's still viable. And for some of these countries, the enrollments are declining. And that leads on to the return on investment. It takes, you know, effort and investment to partner with an institution or to set up your branch campuses, and then if it doesn't work out, that's a lot of money down the drain, you know, that you have to justify to your board of trustees or whatever it is that that your university or your institution is governed by. And so there's a lot of risk as well, not just financial, but it's also legal risks. It's hard to recruit faculty. So our regulator mandates that if you are teaching a master program, you have to have a PhD. If you're teaching a bachelor program, you have to have a master program. So then they also expect that to be complied with when you are running an offshore program. And sometimes that's hard to find the right sort of faculty to teach. Not so much in India, because everyone has a master degree. If you're, you know, quite a few people have PhDs. The other thing that's becoming evident is the competition from online learning providers offering quite cheap alternatives to, you know, kind of face-to-face learning environment. And you get the situation where you might be able to do one unit with one university online, do another unit somewhere else, be like cafeteria style learning where you can pick up different credits, and then somehow or other a university will grant you an award based on all that study that you've done. And it might cost a lot less. And then the other thing I think that's changing a lot is around industry and what they need with the Industrial Revolution 4.0, whatever. There's a lot of changes to the workplace, and we don't really know what kind of workplace, you know, our students are going to have in another 10 years' time, and what kinds of jobs there'll be. So trying to work out as a university in terms of your own planning, you know, and strategy and where you want to be, is transnational education the way to go? You know, that's a question for many institutions now. As far as risks, you've got, I just want to mention that, you know, Monash College, Victoria University, they were working in Sri Lanka. So when they had the Easter bombings, everyone went into a panic because are our students safe? Are we going to be able to keep delivering the programs? Because they went into lockdown for a couple of weeks. You couldn't actually, the staff or the students were not allowed to travel. You know, there was a big curfew. So that kind of risk is always there in terms of T&E. There's been an increasing concern in many countries around national security, you know, and threats and intellectual espionage. So, you know, if you're running a program in aeronautical engineering or something like that, and you know, you're hosting a number of PhD students who may or may not be working for a government that has, you know, that wants to poach your intellectual property, or worse than that, to break into national security, you know, what's the word? Protected research, then that's quite a concern for you as a university. You'll have to really put into place things around how to make sure that the PhD students that you're enrolling in, you know, are genuine students, and that their research is not going to compromise national security, etc. you can imagine the kinds of complex tax regimes that institutions are faced with, you know, when you're working in China or when you're working in, I don't know, in Singapore or something. There's always risks to brand and reputation if the partner you're working with somehow does something that obviously gives a risk or advertises something in a way that doesn't align with what you think your brand can withstand. And for a lot of institutions, it's also around graduate outcomes and employability. What I mentioned before about the changing world of work, you know, how do we make sure that our transnational education students are in fact getting the jobs that they have invested a lot of money for before they come? Having said that, I think there have been some studies and interesting ones around whether, you know, if you travel from, say, Vietnam and go to Australia to get an award, by the time you go back, you know, a lot of students feel that they've lost their connection to the local community. They might have lost their networks in industry, so it might be harder to get jobs. It's actually, for Chinese students going back to China, they found that some of their counterparts have found it easier to navigate their way through industry and get jobs because they've stayed in country. So that's also an opportunity as far as TNE, because you know, and with Victoria University and Ganpat, they get both awards from Ganpat and Victoria University. So that's a way to kind of, for the student to protect their employment outcomes. So in terms of what might be emerging models and markets, you know, what are the factors that make a successful program and a successful partnership? Clearly, there's lots of factors, whether they're environmental, economic, it's terms of strategic alignment with your partner. There's lots of those things, and I think a lot of institutions around the world are kind of at a stage where a lot of their transnational education activity has come to a point where it's quite mature, but is it still delivering the value that you want it to deliver? I think it's also good to know, well, in terms of who needs transnational education these days. You know, a lot of the countries where TNE has operated in the past now have really, really good systems themselves. I mean, and if you look at China, for instance, they're powering up the rankings, and will they, you know, they might need TNE, but in where? So it might not be the students in Jiangsu province or around Beijing. They might be the students in the West. And then you'll have to ask yourself, as an institution, do you want to go out to the west of China, where English language is probably not a really, you know, they don't have very good English language skills in that area yet, or where they may not be able to afford TNE to the same extent that students in some of the more affluent provinces in China are able to. And in terms of what forms of TNE will be needed, this is something that we all grapple with, and as far as whether it's all going to be face-to-face or whether it's all going to be distance or online, I'm not sure. What are your own thoughts around this? Because I see that Ganpat's quite an innovative university in lots of ways. I'm not sure how much you think that distance or online education is going to form a critical part of your strategy in terms of being able to reach more Indian students or even students across your beyond your borders. But you know, these are the sorts of questions that, as an institution, I'm sure you'll be interested to discuss. You know, in terms of your strategy. As far as the opportunities, I think a lot of countries that were hosts are now becoming providers themselves. So if you look at somewhere like Malaysia, who've been a host country of TNE for 20 or 30 years, now they're going out themselves to places like other countries in the ASEAN region. So Malaysia might be going to Myanmar or Cambodia, or they might be going to the Pacific, and offering their own degree programs, as well. And the other opportunity, I think, and possibly another emerging model is around consortia-based provision. So you might have and I know that Deakin University is doing this, where they're partnering with a number of institutions to deliver their programs through an online platform. And it might be that they give each other credit for each other's units, and that the total number of units then leads to an award from one or other of the universities that are in that consortium. And for vocational education and training, at least in Australia, TNE for VET, VET, has often been in consortia because one particular institution might not have the expertise or the resources or the manpower to deliver on a particular skill. So our RMIT delivered an apprenticeship program in seven qualifications in a mining site in Laos. In the middle of Laos, there was a mining site. It was owned by, firstly, an Australian company, and then it was bought out by a Chinese company. It was a gold mining site. So RMIT couldn't deliver all the programs, electricians, carpenters, heavy duty vehicle drivers, etc. So they partnered with a number of other vocational education providers to deliver those apprenticeships. So those sorts of consortia-based provision might be the way of the future, where you pool your resources together to offer something more substantial. And then there's more flexible modes of delivery. So Victoria University has a partner in Singapore called Lisan Academy, and they're doing something quite interesting. So they're delivering not our degrees, but their own qualifications to students who are based in Myanmar, the Philippines, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, through streaming and through online provision. But those students also have local centres where they will go and get local tutorial support. So that's quite an interesting model. They're a small institution in Singapore that's actually backed quite heavily by the Singapore government, but they're reaching out to lots of students around the world because of the technology that they have available, and the kinds of faculty that they have. And what they've done is, it's not just streaming the program. So the students are enrolled for a 2-year higher diploma or something like that. So from the start of that program, the students are already working part-time in industry, and they help them place those students. And by the time they finish their 2-year qualification, they've also had industry experience for that whole time. And I've just heard from Dr. Sharma around your Japan, India Manufacturing Institute, and that's a kind of similar model where the students will not only come out with some kind of qualification, but they'll already have some work experience. It's about learning on the job. And sometimes I think about where is transnational education going to be in 10 years' time? Are we still going to be awarding degrees? Or are we going to be awarding small micro credentials, that students kind of add up eventually into some kind of award, or maybe not, because who is going to need a degree? I think a lot of American companies now are moving, to recruiting from high schools, not from undergraduate universities. They're recruiting directly from high schools, and you know, they've got their own universities or training institutes in place. So, I mean, I can't predict where it's going to be. I think I think it'll still be a lot of it. I think students and humans like connection, human beings. I can't see that in undergraduate education, online education will be the thing. I mean, it'll be an important part of learning, but it won't be the only kind of learning that they'll do, especially at undergrad level. Once you get into industry and you're working and you're constrained for your time, then maybe there's an opportunity for you to do online or blended learning. But yeah, it's I think those opportunities are also possibly ways for the future. But I'd be interested to hear what you think is going to happen in India as far as transnational education, because I'm very new to the Indian market and Indian higher education industry. I've only started really working with Indian providers since last year, so I'm not as familiar with India as I am with other countries. Does anyone want to tell me what they think about what might happen here?
We have in engineering we have a BTech program, that is computer engineering, information technology, mechatronics, and other also. Previously we had also tried that transnational education type of program, where the students, they are supposed to do BTech over here and post graduation over there, or something blend kind of program. That is like 3+2 or 4+1 or something. So is it possible to like introduce such kind of programs? Because we feel that technically government side there is some kind of issues. So is there any possibilities in such kind of programs?
So in terms of from moving from vocational education to higher education, those sorts of programs?
So graduate program to postgraduate program.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look around the world at institutions that have been offering transnational education for a long time, everyone is looking at India, because, you know, with your very young population, you'd be crazy not to be here. But for many institutions, it's still, the regulation is still not clear. So it's always, you know, do you wait for other people to pave the way, and then you know, like Victoria University is paving the way, I think, for lots of other institutions. But certainly those sorts of models are very prevalent elsewhere. So, and if it's needed in India, I think the market eventually will decide. But there's got to be a supportive environment for that. Yeah.
Are there any questions? No? Okay, well, thank you for coming, and I'm sorry I was late. And yeah, I hope that was of some interest to you. Thank you very much.
सरस्वती अनुरागी गणपत विद्यानगर गणपत विद्यानगर नव चेतन हम पगले प्रगटे आळस जड़ता त्यागी युग युग नाम धारा हरती नार ज्योत रही जागी युग युग नाम धारा हरती नार ज्योत रही जागी गणपत विद्यानगर गणपत विद्यानगर ज्ञान तणा निर्मल प्रकाश थी धर धर उज्ज्वल कर शो झलकावी स्वर्ग भूमी पथदर्शू गणपत विद्यानगर गणपत विद्यानगर समाजनोत्कर्ष साधवा हमें विद्याने आराधी रहे न कोई दीन अकिंचन क्रूर दुष्ट हतभागी रहे न कोई दीन अकिंचन क्रूर दुष्ट हतभागी गणपत विद्यानगर गणपत विद्यानगर यज्ञदान तप कर्म हमारा शाश्वत रहे प्रकाशी खरा गुर्जरी मात भारती थाशे धन्य सुभागी खरा गुर्जरी मात भारती थाशे धन्य सुभागी गणपत विद्यानगर गणपत विद्यानगर विवेक विद्या पराक्रम थी अंबर आंबीलैषु तुझराम सुफलाम धरती माना चरणे जीवन धर्षु सुजलाम सुफलाम धरती माना चरणे जीवन धर्षु गणपत विद्यानगर गणपत विद्यानगर
Thank you.